Well, what do we think, team? Shall we jump in? All right, let's jump in. There is several people who may join a few minutes late, and we will ensure that they are aware that this is being recorded and they can view anything that perhaps has been missed. So welcome and good evening, and thank you for joining us and gathering today on the lands of Treaty 7 to join the Sheriff King Home Redevelopment Information Session. My name is Talia Bell. I am the Vice President of Programs and Services with YW Calgary. And in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nation Region 3, and all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Again, welcome and thank you so much. I am pleased to introduce the team on the call this evening. We have Lori Van Royen, who is the Development Manager, Joanna Domes, who is the Special Projects Director, Carla Link, the Director of Communications and Community Relations, and Catherine Quick, who is our Community Engagement Specialist. So thanks, team, for waving. Quick housekeeping, we will be recording this event, as I did mention, and you may notice that you were muted. David, you tested this function and proved us wrong, but we have chosen to use the chat function tonight so that everyone has an opportunity to share their questions and engage. And we commit to fully capturing all questions and providing a summary of the responses to be shared afterwards with everyone interested. So Catherine, I'll get you to put up the agenda if you would. Thank you very much. So this evening, we are going to start with an overview of the project. And Lori will then take you through the design and development, which is really, I'm sure, the piece that you have all joined for and are keenly interested in. And then Catherine Quick will moderate the chat. And again, we will ensure that we answer all questions. We're happy to stay longer if there's lots of questions. We have allocated an hour for this session, but again, are willing to go longer to ensure that all are answered. And then Carla will wrap up with how you can stay connected. So with that, let's jump in. And I'll take you on a little overview of the why and why we are looking to redevelop the Sheriff King Home site. So for 110 years, some of you may be aware that YW Calgary has worked in the community, and we've worked long adapting our programming to meet the changing needs of women and their children and families in Calgary. And we continue to support women to live free from violence, improve mental wellness, and help them achieve economic prosperity. So we are guided by our vision of women thriving in a safe and equitable community. And our mission is to intervene, empower, and lead when and where women need us most. For 4 decades, we have offered safety and support to women and children fleeing domestic violence at the shelter right here in Inglewood, on the little triangle of land that we call the Sheriff King Home site. And we laugh because we have an affinity for triangles, because as you may well know, the hub is located just a block away, and it too is on a triangle parcel of land. And a new Sheriff King Home is planned on this same parcel where the existing shelter is, and where many of you on this call, the local Inglewood community and our immediate neighbors have welcomed us for the past 40 years, and truly thank you for that. And we value greatly working in the community of Inglewood. We have long intended to redevelop this facility as the current building is rapidly approaching its end of life. And you will see here, Catherine has changed the image to the current shelter and what it looks like. And a new facility will allow us to better meet the needs of women and children in a trauma-informed environment, really looking to provide a sense of hope and healing. So many of you may wonder what we do at the shelter and what goes on behind the doors. The shelter is a place for women or women with or without children fleeing or experiencing domestic violence. And while a woman or a woman with her children is staying in the shelter, we provide them many services, So things like basic needs, so food, clothing, hygiene, safety, counseling and support is a major service that we provide the women. Navigating the complex system of things like legal supports, the justice system, health, finance. For many women, they've never had their own financial freedom in terms of their own bank accounts and things like that. Immigration and housing being a very major one that we support with. We also support them with advocacy referrals, with court support, with access to translation services and cultural specific resources, and again, housing. So most importantly, when women stay at the shelter with us, they and their families have full control over their recovery, and they decide which services they access that are best suited to their needs on their journey to healing and safety. We also operate a 24-hour crisis line, which provides women and sometimes men the guidance and emergency support that they may be seeking. So lots of the women who come and stay at the shelter as well continue to work with us after they leave. And we have case managers within the shelter that support them in the community as they transition into independent living and other safer situations. And we work very closely with partners in the community like the Calgary Board of Education, because it's so important to ensure that the children who are in the shelter are able to continue their education and stay in school regardless of where they're at in the city. So the programs and services help clients move from crisis to stability. And we've supported thousands and thousands of women and children who are in unsafe and sometimes physically violent relationships in our time in Inglewood. In 2020, we supported approximately 600 women and children, which brings us to today. So although Sheriff King was the first purpose-built emergency shelter for women fleeing abuse in North America, built in 1982, it is now quite outdated. And as I mentioned, it is at the end of its life cycle. It is not considered best practice. It doesn't include trauma-informed design. The facility itself is dark, inflexible, it's low ceilinged, it has very limited natural light, narrow hallways, and overall just a sense of no longer meeting the needs of women and children at the shelter. So Catherine, I'll get you to change the slide, please. So we envision a new space for them. And as you can see immediately, this building is a 3-story building to align with current zoning for the site and has many, many windows and welcoming spaces. We are looking to increase the capacity of the shelter from 15 units to 20 units to meet the demand for women and children fleeing domestic violence in Calgary and surrounding area. And new features will be in this shelter, like adaptable common spaces. And one of my favorites is pet spaces. So there's very few shelters in Calgary and surrounding area that allow small pets like dog or a cat. And a lot of women do not seek shelter to leave their violent situation because they have pets. And so by having this, it ensures that we can enable a safe place for women and children. The new shelter also has trauma-informed design principles, really designed to promote health and healing, that sense of safety and dignity and empowerment. High ceilings, as I mentioned, lots of windows, minimal barriers, so that feeling of being trapped or crowded just won't exist in this new facility. And beautiful outdoor space is part of what we are hoping to design in this. And Inglewood is such a beautiful community with so much wonderful green space. So leaning into that with this as well. And research shows that settings that include vegetation and gardens and green space really increase the rate of healing, tranquility, and enhanced self-esteem, which are all things that we look to support women and children with while they're with us. So housing is a major component of supporting women and children after their stay at the shelter. And our research with women over many, many years of service indicates that most of them want to live in independent housing. And the options at this point are very limited for independent housing for women leaving the shelter after they've stayed with us. And second stage shelter is often one of the options, but that's not what the preference is. We also know there is a great shortage of affordable housing in Calgary, which is why this project also includes the development of 20 permanent housing units on the same parcel of land. And I'll get you to change the slide, Catherine, and put that one up, please. Thank you. So these are self-contained units with balconies and street front entrances. The women who live here with children it's designed for women and children fleeing domestic violence, and the women and children who do live here will be able to access supports from the shelter, which is on the same lot, as well as just a close block away at the hub. It is permanent housing, meaning the minimum tenure to stay will be a minimum of 3 months. And our vision is that this housing will create stability for families, connection to community. For example, kids can attend Colonel Walker School, which is just a couple blocks away, access community activities and businesses, and most importantly, just be part of the vibrant local Inglewood area and residency. So in order to create these beautiful buildings and spaces, we need to remove the existing shelter on the land, and we do have a temporary location that we will be moving to. And shelter services will continue during this time at the new location. And we expect to move out the first week of August. So in 2 short weeks, we are packing up and moving to a temporary location. So that's a little bit about the shelter and the why it's so important that we look to redevelop this site. And I know the really interesting piece is now going to be presented by Laurie Van Rooyen, who will take you through the architecture and construction process. So over to you, Laurie.
Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me now? Great, thank you. And thanks, Talia. I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk a little bit about the program that we've developed and the architectural concept that we've developed. I will tell you that we are just at the end of schematic design, which means we're moving into a more detailed design. So there are still opportunities for changes. But Catherine, could I have you move to the next slide, please? And to the next one. Great. Okay, let's start here. So what you have before you right now is a diagram that shows the community context. I'll just go through it quickly. We have the site here right by where it says the green belt. We have opportunities facing sort of south, which is the residential street. The main access actually faces the commercial development, which is Lou's Auto Body, which I'm sure that you are all familiar with. If you look to the north of the site, we have the YW Hub facility. So the connections between the hub and the Sheriff King site are incredibly important from a programmatic point of view, because our intent is that this building is not to be necessarily public. It is actually to be for women and children, and then of course the women that would be and their families living within the affordable housing. Programming for the women that are in the affordable housing would happen within the hub facility, and that's important as we go through the presentation today. Before I go to the next slide, what I do want to talk a little bit about is the design drivers for the architectural design. Really important for us to understand, just like we did with the hub facility, what is the importance of this building to women and their families. And we have developed a series of design drivers that drove the design, which I'll talk about today. The first one being a beacon, which was very similar to the hub. This is a beacon of hope and opportunity for women and their children. This site will serve women and children, whereas our hub site serves women. We wanted it to be a safe and welcoming environment. So of course, as Talia has mentioned, it will incorporates both trauma-informed design and community principles, the SEPTED principles, which are environmental design to the exterior of the building. We want the building to also be connected to community and focused on partnerships within the sector. So of course, the kinds of spaces that are within the facility will support that kind of connection. Really, really important to this, Talia's already mentioned it, is that comfort and home-like setting. This has to feel like a home. It has to feel like you are part of the residential development in the community. It must be inclusive in terms of being approachable and diverse. We serve many different women from many backgrounds, and so they have to see themselves in this facility. So we spent a lot of time really focusing in on what is important to making this home-like and inclusive. And then of course, Talia also mentioned the wonderful services, the wraparound services, so the well-being, the physical, mental, and social well-being of the women and children that we serve. And then we want a resilient building. We want a building that is going to last for a very long time, that is going to be able to be flexible enough to pivot to the changing needs of the families that we serve. So those are all of the design drivers that we've chosen for the architectural component, and I'll talk a little bit about them as we go through. So the slide that you have in front of you right now is the current zoning is MCG. We are not asking for a land use change. We are working within the current zoning. The MCG land use in the context, it provides actually quite a dense opportunity to develop. If you look at MCG across the city, they have some very large, dense developments. But on this site in particular, the city has added a density modifier, which means we are only able to develop 20 units of housing on this site. And it's reflective of, we think, the RC2, which is south of the facility. And so we are working within that, which requires only 20 units. The shelter itself is under the assisted living use within the discretionary use of the bylaw. And that allows for us to develop sort of separate bedrooms, common kitchen spaces, common eating spaces, common areas for gathering, but not individual units. So that's what they mean by assisted living. And then of course we have a 12-meter maximum height, which is where we're working towards at this point in time. You'll also notice it's in the flood fringe, just like the hub was. We will be maintaining the existing levels. So this building will not be up on a pedestal, which is something we do not want. It will be at the same level as your homes, which is incredibly important for us so that we're not towering over. In some instances, in the flood fringe, the city has actually asked that we could have been actually 5 feet above where we are right now. But because this area did not flood in the 2013 flood, and because we have agreed to mitigations, for example, putting our mechanical 5 feet above the main level, we can maintain our ground status, which is what we really, really want to be doing. So if you want to go to the next slide, Catherine. So this is a site plan. I hope you all can see this. It's a little small, at least on my screen it is, but I'll read what it says. It's 0.64 of a hectare, which is just under a little bit under 2 acres, which is not a huge site. There's a lot that needs to happen on this site. You can see that we've tried to mass the buildings along 20th Avenue to be consistent with the residential land use to the south of us. And our shelter building, which is not commercial in nature, but it is more it is not residential in the same way that the affordable housing building is. We've tried to match it to what's existing right now, which is Lou's Auto Body. You can see that we've actually pulled the parking off into the site. We actually have an in and out on this, just like we do on the hub. Our intention is to bring the traffic into the site rather than having it on the public street. There are 39 parking stalls right now that are appropriated to this site. And that is actually more than what the bylaw requires, but we tried to maximize the parking on the site so that we didn't have people parking in the community and on the public street, which is totally acceptable, but we just wanted to maintain the parking on site as much as possible. You can see that the 2 buildings on the site actually create a courtyard, very similar to the hub, except our courtyard here is not internal to the building. It's actually external, but it will be a secure place. And I'll talk about that in a moment. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So here's our concept for the actual site itself. We see that various parts, we've tried to screen the parking on the west side of the site so that residences to the south of us will not necessarily see the parking. We're looking at landscaping to do that. I've already talked about the at-grade access. What's really, really important and is actually true to the bylaw is that the ground floor levels on the affordable housing must have access to patios and to the grounds, to the street. And so we've accommodated that both on the courtyard side and on the street side. But on the shelter side, because of the secure nature of the facility, we've actually sort of elected to put the green space actually on an elevated patio on the second floor. So women and children will still have access to the outdoors and see the beautiful courtyard, and you'll see that in a moment. But we, for security reasons, cannot provide access to the street level just as per the bylaw. So that's one thing that we are working through with the city. You can see that we have a private courtyard. Again, that will be fenced off. You can understand that there are security issues and we want women and children to be able to enjoy the exterior in safety. And then of course, we're trying to maintain as many of the existing mature trees as we can. It is a tree-filled site, so we will have to remove some, but we are actually intending to put in more than we take out. And then again, we have some controlled access sites, which I'll talk, access points, which I'll talk a little bit more as we go through. So if we can just go to the next slide, please, Catherine. Again, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the landscaping. Talia already mentioned trauma-informed design and the importance of the landscaping and the outdoor spaces for healing. And we see this sort of courtyard as a healing courtyard in many ways. We will be using natural existing or traditional plants like things like the Carl Forster grass, which we see throughout Inglewood, the spirea, which we see throughout the city of Calgary, actually. The trembling aspen, which is an important aspect of the Blackfoot culture and the land that we are sitting on. We're looking at wood fencing that is actually durable and long-term. So it's a metal-based fencing so that it does not sort of fade over time. So we're really excited about the opportunity to create this beautiful landscape, not just for the inner courtyard, but for the external areas. We go to the next slide. One of the things when we were looking at the massing of the buildings was to try and maintain and illuminate the sunlight in all areas. And that just doesn't mean to our site, and I'll show you the shadow studies at the end. We've made sure that we are not casting shadow on any residential building within the area that we are in. Obviously, because of the secure nature of the work that we do, we have to have public and private spaces. So the areas obviously on the outside of the site are very public. The areas on the inside are very private. And then of course, we want to create those community connections, both to the residential to the south and also the city connections to the BRT, the 9th Avenue corridor off to Deerfoot and then down to downtown. So if we go to the next slide. So this is where it gets really exciting for us because we started to talk about, well, what does this site mean to us? What does it mean to the women and children who will be here? And we chose the concept of the garden as being an incredibly important and healing opportunity for us. They also align really well with our design drivers, which we spoke about early. So gardens, like I know, are a place of growth. They don't happen overnight, but the environment is one that facilitates life through nurturing spaces, warm light, and the support of others. And so, of course, our design starts to reflect those concepts. Greenhouses provide also protection and stability for plants, but if you morph that into a building, the shed style that you saw Talia show at the beginning is really about that protection and stability for women. And it allows the roots to be developed that will support them once they move beyond the walls of the shelter into the affordable housing and beyond. And then of course, gardens help us connect to nature, and they are a place that we all feel safe in. We all feel safe in gathering. So the architectural concept is based on the garden, and it will help to let you understand how the building was massed. So if we go to the next slide. So here you see the 16th Avenue side of the building. One of the things I want to point out is behind that beautiful cherry blooming tree is actually a glass in a sort of connector between the two buildings, the two shed buildings. And what that does towards what Talia talked about is that trauma-informed design is not about closing in spaces, it's about creating spaces that are visible. So people who are in trauma, who have experienced trauma, do not need to be closed in. They need to see what's out there. They need to see what's coming at them. And so this design with the windows and the glassed in sort of central welcoming area really does show that, you know, we can see through to the courtyard. It's a beautiful space. It's a welcoming space. And when you arrive on the door, you feel, I'm at home. I am welcome here. And so the concept of that is carried throughout. If you look at the renders, the white is actually a very similar color to what we used on the hub facility. We wanted to create a little bit of a campus component. It's a batten board, which is like a hardy plank board, which is a very solid, sustainable material that will maintain its color over time. If you look at the sort of wood components of it, it's actually a long board. And that, of course, is a metal cladding that actually maintains its color of wood over a very long period of time. So we know that this building will look the way it looks like now in 50 to 75 years, which is what it's intended to last for. If you go to the next slide. This is a view actually looking from the west. And so this, no, is it west? Yes, it is. Sorry, I have to get my bearings here if I don't have it saying the numbers. What's interesting about this is that we actually have used the whole concept of the garden boxes and the trellis that you might see on a fence as part of the building concept. So you see the shed, the garden box, and the trellis. And this actually garden box helps actually to scale that building down to the more residential level, which we see to the south or to the east of the building. If you go to the next slide. And this is actually looking at the housing. So the housing, you can see the balconies are based on a trellis. And so the concept of the garden has been carried forward. You can see the boxy nature of it, which is actually representative of garden boxes and the greenhouse components. And it also uses the same material that we see on the actual shelter building itself. Again, you can see that the ground floor units have actually access to the street, which creates a more residential urban feel to the development. And it is, we think it's a lovely looking building that actually says that, you know, this is a YW building, but it also is trying to integrate its way back into the community as well, because of course that's very important to us. Again, these buildings are 3 stories. They are consistent with the land use itself right now with the density modifiers that have been put on this. And again, we're looking at the streetscape that would be 20th Avenue. So we can go to the next slide. Again, this is actually a view looking from the west on this one. So it would be maybe if you were standing slightly down from Blackfoot Trail, you'd be looking down at the street. You can see that we've used a lot of the landscaping to sort of integrate into the existing housing that we see to the south of the facility. If you can go to the next slide. This is the inner courtyard, and this is something that we're really excited about. We have a variety of different spaces within it. We have active spaces, we have quiet spaces, we have reflective spaces, we have gathering spaces. And what we're hoping is that the women who are coming to the shelter or living in the affordable housing will be able to connect and peer and mentor each other and get that peer support that is often missing in their life and the reason why they're coming to the shelter. So the next slide, please. So this is the shadow studies. The City of Calgary always requires us to do shadow studies at the September equinox. And so you can see that at any time, the only time is at 6 p.m. where we have some shadows onto Lou's auto body area. But for the most part, there are no shadowing anywhere on the other side to the residences to the south. And so we worked very hard to make sure that the building massing actually responds to the community. And so that tonight concludes our presentation. We're pretty excited about the building, as you could tell. We're hopeful that that this will also excite you as community members, as having something new in your community. And of course, as Talia has mentioned, we've been here for a very long time. We don't plan on changing many of the things that we do now. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. I was eagerly waiting to be unmuted. which is the story of my life for those who know me. Thank you so much. At this time, we would love to open it up for any questions that anybody might have.
Again, Talia, you might remind people if they want to use the chat function for their questions, we can make sure that we get those answered because I don't think everybody's unmuted.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that reminder, Lori. Yes, we are using the chat function for this meeting. So please, if you do have any questions, we welcome you to put them in the chat. And if there are no questions, that's okay too. Okay, there is one question here. So just an increase in traffic overall in the area. Lori, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I can. So we're only increasing the shelter units by 5. And what we do know is that many of the women that come to the shelter actually don't have vehicles. And so like it is now, we don't anticipate that we would have a huge increase in traffic in the area. I already mentioned that this is not a public building like the hub, where we would see community access programs and people from community using those programs. So we actually don't see any increase in traffic from the other programming uses. In terms of the affordable housing, it is 20 additional units. Yes, there will be some additional traffic, but we also know that many of the women that are in the shelter that move to the affordable housing actually will not also have a vehicle. We know that the traffic will increase, but it will be very minimal. We also know that because there's been a light put in on 16th, that has helped the traffic flow and getting in and out of your community. So I think that has been a very positive step to sort of monitor the traffic coming out. But basically, the long and the short of the answer is we don't anticipate a major or significant increase in traffic. It will be very, very minor.
And Lori, there's just another piece here about road closures during construction. If you speak to that.
There will definitely be some road closures during construction. You can see that the extent of the construction is very close to the road, but our contractor is required. And by the way, we do have a construction company on site now. It is Canada Construction. They have great experience from the hub, and they do know they have learned from the hub building. And so we do need to follow the city bylaws in terms of road closures. The city of Calgary is responsible for letting everyone know that there will be road closures. But in the event that doesn't happen, because we have learned from that, we will be hoping to get all of your emails if you're interested. And we can make sure that when there is a road closure, that we give you ample notice to that. When there is a road closure, there has always got to be another access point, another way into the community or out of the community. So we'll make sure that those detours are very, very clear. And I see there's another question. And when do you expect construction to end? Is that Joanna? That's from you. You should know that. Good question. Okay, so we anticipate that the construction will take upwards of 15 months to complete, which is a little bit less time than our hub facility, even though we're constructing 2 facilities, hopefully at the same time. If we do it at the same time, it would be around 15 months. We would be starting with the affordable housing project. And then we will be starting with, and then ending with the shelter project. And so we don't know the start time because of course it is dependent on funding. So once funding is secured, then from that time period, it would be about 15 months total construction.
We have another question here.
Yes, from David. I don't know, Talia, if you want to start on that one.
Yeah,
talk about why we need to get rid of this existing facility.
Yeah, well, so in terms of, I believe, with the estimate on the roof, and that does predate me. So Carla, please do feel free to jump in, or Joanna, if I miss anything on this. But the reality is that we are in that building at this time, and we do have services to provide for women and children every day who are staying with us. As I mentioned, I think that we had 600 women live with us last year, and so we can't have a roof that is leaking no matter what. So unfortunately, and as I mentioned, we're getting near end of life of the building. And so continuing to repair things like roofs and electrical and whatnot is not viable. And so that's why we are seeking to build a new structure.
And Tilly, if I can just add, $20,000 is a very high estimate. I'd like to know what kind of roof you have for $20,000. So you're correct, David, that there was a new roof put on the structure a couple of years ago. The extent of the cost was minimal in terms of that. It was not very expensive to do. And you're right, we did think about that when we were looking at the facility itself. And what we can tell you is that we have an older building and a newer building. The older building has a very old mechanical system. The newer building has a newer one, but we would have to start to connect those mechanical systems as we renovated the building. We do have, because we did need a new roof, we do have breaches in the envelope. So we did have water egress or ingress into the facility. So that has caused some issues in the internal facility. We also have electrical systems that would need to be reworked. We have grading issues on the site. So what's happening right now is the slope, the water is coming into the building from the existing outside into the building. And so that has degraded the facility over time in terms of its ability to withstand any more time on the building. So ultimately, even though we did replace the roof and we did replace some of the windows, it has been determined from our studies that this building is at end of life. And regardless of the money that we put into it, it is not worth the investment for us to put more money into it. In addition to that, it is functionally not appropriate for a shelter. Talia mentioned at the beginning, it has narrow corridors, it's dark, it doesn't have access to natural light in all places. The shelter units themselves are smaller, we're seeing larger families come in. And so basically it is mission prohibitive. It does not work in terms of functionality. So we take in all of that consideration, and that is the reason why we've chosen to take the building down and build new.
Lori, there's a second component to David's question around the quality of construction. Can you speak to that?
Top quality structure. Well, I would say that I'm thinking you're talking about a quality structure for only 5 extra units. I think we've talked about the fact that the existing 15 units are not functional. We've got smaller rooms. We have larger families coming in. So it's not just about 5 extra units. If we could build more, we would. But we've determined that 5 is the amount of our funding at this point. And so I would say that the quality structure that we have now is not quality. And so what we're doing is we're adding 20 additional units that have much better quality than we have on the 15 that we have now.
Does anybody else have any questions, or is there anything else you'd like us to reiterate? That maybe, I know there was a couple people who joined later. Aaron, I know you're one of them, and you've just brought the question in. So how often will updates be shared with the community? And I can take that one actually, because that's what I and my team will be doing. And I was part of my wrap up. I was going to talk about how we will keep you informed. It is absolutely our commitment to do so. On the web page where all of you signed up for tonight's event, that will be our sort of central focus for a lot of content. It also has a sign up for a newsletter that will be specific to this project. You're not going to get a whole bunch of join our gym kind of information that's about this project. We will be committed to regular updates through that medium. There's also an email address and a phone number, which will actually get you directly to me. So if there's something that you haven't heard right away, then that's the way to reach out. And we will keep an active and live FAQ document on that website, webpage as well. So the questions you're asking today, we will add to what we've already developed, and we will continue to add to it as the project goes along. So yes, there will not lack for information from us through this project. I can promise that. And Aaron, your ICA monthly meetings, great question. Phil and I have had many conversations about us joining. We are happy to come and join at any time. Certainly willing to participate in your monthly meetings on a regular basis. Thanks for the great questions, Erin. Is there anything else we can answer for everybody? I know it's 7:45 on a beautiful evening, so want to make sure we're giving you the space to ask your questions, but also want to respect everybody's time. Thanks, Colleen. We think it looks beautiful too. We're really excited.
Could you tell?
Yeah, could you tell? Okay, well, if nobody has anything else, and like as Lori said, and as I said, please, if you wake up at 2 a.m. because it's too hot to sleep, send me an email. I will maybe not answer at 2 a.m., but I will answer tomorrow. So do stay in touch, and yes, you will see updates on that webpage. Maybe Catherine, you can share that last slide that has our contact information on it. We will also collect everything. Oh, sorry, David, I'm trying to cut you off. I noted the old structure had window protection. Anything for the new? Lori, did you want to?
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great question. I will tell you, David, that we're still working through that. There's many different ways that we can do it. Window protection is a bit institutional in terms of the grids. And so you'll notice that we actually don't have a basement per se in this building. The other way that we are looking at it is we can use the glazing on the windows is actually more robust than you would see in the current facility. It's more consistent with what we're seeing at the hub, which is double or triple glazed windows in some instances for two reasons: for security purposes, but also for acoustics, right? Because of course we know that we're also on the flight path of the airport and also the trains. And so we have to have some acoustical components to it as well. That actually opens it up to a more general question around security. So you'll notice in the area of the front of the building, which we didn't sort of focus on, but just like the hub, we actually do have protection so that people can't get into the building either using a vehicle or other mechanisms. So the shelter itself is a very secure building. It's just that we've chosen not to use window guards in this instance.
Great. Thanks, Lori. Anything else? I don't want to cut anybody off. We're absolutely here to stay around if you have more questions. And Erin, thank you for your message. We'll, I did have a conversation with Phil about your next meeting, so we'll circle back on that for sure. Okay, well, then I'm gonna thank everybody so much for joining us tonight. Very much appreciate you taking the time out of your evening. I hope everybody has a cool place to spend the rest of the evening. And yes, please do go to the webpage, sign up for the newsletters, and drop me a note anytime. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.